Danielle Roberts, a 30-year-old African-American corrections officer, stepped through the heavy iron gates of the Birmingham Women's Correctional Facility for the first time. The building loomed before her, its cold, gray facade reflecting the seriousness of the assignment she had accepted. Known for housing some of the most challenging female inmates in Alabama, the prison's reputation preceded it. This was not the general population ward she had worked in before. It was a maximum security unit, where every decision, every step, carried weight. The air inside was heavy with a mix of antiseptic and institutional monotony. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly as Officer Greg Houston, a seasoned shift supervisor, led Danielle through the labyrinth of hallways. He spoke in clipped tones, outlining her responsibilities and emphasizing the need for vigilance. The long corridors were lined with metal doors, each a barrier between the guards and the women whose lives were confined within. Danielle absorbed his instructions carefully, her focus sharpening with every word. She knew this was a significant step in her career, one that would test her resolve in ways she had yet to imagine. The atmosphere of the facility was oppressive. It wasn't just the physical space, the echoing footsteps, the clang of distant gates, but the silent tension that seemed to hang in the air. Every interaction between guards and inmates was steeped in unspoken rules and invisible boundaries. Danielle noted the sharp glances from the prisoners as she passed, their eyes studying her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She was the new guard, an unknown element in a strictly regulated environment. It was during her orientation tour that Danielle first noticed Kiana Jackson. Standing apart from the other inmates, Kiana exuded a presence that was hard to ignore. She was in her late 20s, with an almost disarming charisma that set her apart. Her neatly braided hair, clean uniform, and upright posture contrasted sharply with the resigned demeanor of many of the other women. There was something in her gaze, a quiet confidence, perhaps even defiance, that lingered with Danielle long after she had walked past. As Greg continued explaining the intricacies of the daily routines, Danielle's thoughts occasionally drifted back to Kiana. The inmate's name was familiar. It appeared on the roster of those convicted of violent crimes. 15 years for armed robbery. The details, however, struck a deeper chord. During the heist, a security guard had been killed. Danielle had read about the case in the local news years ago, but had never imagined she would meet the woman behind the headlines. The day progressed at a relentless pace. By the time her shift ended, Danielle felt the weight of her new responsibilities settling heavily on her shoulders. She returned to her small apartment, her mind replaying the day's events. The cold efficiency of the facility, the sharp directives from Greg, the way the other guards carried themselves, it was all so different from what she was used to. And then there was Kiana. Danielle couldn't shake the memory of how Kiana had looked at her, her eyes holding a gaze that seemed to pierce through the professional detachment Danielle tried to maintain. It wasn't a look of aggression or fear, but something else entirely, assurance, perhaps even intrigue. That night, lying in bed, Danielle stared at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting back to Kiana. The image of the inmate standing calmly amidst the chaos of the prison was etched in her mind. There was something magnetic about her, something that felt both unsettling and intriguing. Danielle told herself it was natural to notice someone so different from the others, especially on her first day. Yet, deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something unexpected. Danielle found herself crossing paths with Kiana more frequently as the days in the prison passed. At first, it seemed coincidental, a natural result of their assigned routines. But soon, Danielle began to notice the deliberate way Kiana positioned herself in the library or near the cell block doors when Danielle was on duty. Their interactions were subtle at first, a glance, a polite nod, a comment about the day. Gradually, these brief exchanges became longer and more personal. Kiana shared bits and pieces of her life, her words carrying a weight that Danielle found hard to ignore. She spoke about her childhood in Montgomery, how she had dreamed of owning her own boutique one day, and how financial struggles had pushed her into bad decisions. Her voice carried a mixture of regret and resilience, and her honesty struck a chord with Danielle. Unlike the hardened personas of many inmates, Kiana seemed to hold onto something softer, something hopeful, even amidst the harshness of prison life. One afternoon, during a quiet moment in the library, Kiana opened up about a relationship from her past. She told Danielle about her ex-boyfriend, a man she had deeply loved despite his flaws. At first, he had been everything she wanted, charming, attentive, and supportive of her dreams. But as time went on, his darker side emerged. He became controlling, angry, and violent. Kiana described the nights she spent in fear, too scared to leave but too heartbroken to stay. Leaving him had been one of the hardest decisions she had ever made. Even after their breakup, she admitted, a part of her still missed him, still wondered if things could have been different. Danielle listened intently, struck by the vulnerability in Kiana's voice and the pain etched into her words. It was a story of love and loss that Danielle couldn't shake from her thoughts. It wasn't long before Kiana began leaving notes for Danielle. Small scraps of paper would appear in the library or tucked beneath a book left on a desk. The notes were never overtly inappropriate but carried a warmth that was hard to dismiss. Kiana thanked Danielle for her kindness, for the way she listened without judgment. She wrote about the isolation she felt and how much it meant to her to have someone acknowledge her humanity. Each note was written with care, the handwriting neat and deliberate, as though Kiana had taken her time crafting the words. Danielle told herself to maintain her professionalism, to treat Kiana no differently than any other inmate. But the notes, coupled with Kiana's charm and vulnerability, began to blur the lines she had so carefully constructed. Kiana's presence lingered with her long after their interactions ended. Her stories replayed in Danielle's mind during quiet moments, and she found herself looking forward to the next shift where their paths might cross again. Others began to notice the shift in Danielle's behavior, though she tried to mask it. LaToya Martin, the prison psychologist, observed how often Danielle lingered near Kiana's cell or stayed late in the library when Kiana was there. LaToya, experienced in reading the emotional states of both inmates and staff, approached Danielle cautiously, hinting at the importance of boundaries in their line of work. Danielle brushed off the concerns, insisting that she was in control and that her interactions with Kiana were purely professional. Despite her assurances, Danielle couldn't deny the growing connection she felt. Kiana had a way of drawing her in, making her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the vulnerability Kiana shared, it was the way she listened in return, as though she genuinely cared about Danielle's thoughts and experiences. The rapport between them grew with each encounter, and while Danielle continued to tell herself it was harmless, a part of her knew that the situation was slipping beyond her control. The connection between Danielle and Kiana deepened in ways that neither of them could fully articulate. Their encounters, once fleeting and guarded, evolved into stolen moments of solitude within the confines of the prison walls. The library became their haven, a place where Danielle lingered longer than necessary under the guise of duty. Occasionally, they found themselves in the laundry room or empty staff quarters, spaces rarely occupied during certain hours. These moments were brief but charged, filled with a sense of intimacy that Danielle had not felt in years. Kiana spoke often about the life she dreamed of beyond the prison gates. She described a small house by the coast, a fresh start where she could build a future far from her mistakes. Her voice held a mix of longing and determination that captivated Danielle. For the first time in years, Danielle felt seen and needed, as though she could be a part of something larger than the monotonous routine of her life. Kiana's words made her believe that she was not just another cog in the machine of the prison system, but someone capable of changing another person's life. One evening, in an unused storage room dimly lit by a flickering overhead light, the tension between them finally broke. Danielle had been leaning against a shelf, listening as Kiana spoke about her past, about the times she had loved and lost, about the dreams she still clung to. There was a vulnerability in her words that made Danielle's chest ache, a need for connection that mirrored her own. Kiana stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper as she confided in Danielle about the loneliness that consumed her within these walls. Danielle felt the heat of her presence, the subtle brush of her arm, and knew there was no going back. Their first kiss was hesitant, a tentative meeting of lips that quickly deepened as years of repressed emotion spilled over. Kiana's hands found Danielle's face, her touch soft but insistent, pulling her closer. Danielle's heart raced as she let herself be swept away, the weight of her uniform and the rules it represented melting into irrelevance. The cold sterility of the room faded, replaced by the warmth of Kiana's embrace and the electricity of their connection. That night, they found solace in each other, their intimacy unfolding with a mixture of urgency and tenderness. The storage room became their world, a temporary escape from the harshness of reality. Danielle marveled at the way Kiana's touch made her feel alive, as though every nerve in her body had been awakened. They moved with a rhythm that felt natural, as though their bodies had always known how to fit together. Kiana whispered soft reassurances, her voice like a bomb against the storm of guilt and doubt swirling in Danielle's mind. When it was over, they lay together on the cold floor, their breathing heavy and synchronized. Danielle traced lazy patterns on Kiana's arm, her mind a tumult of emotions. She felt elation, guilt, and a deep-seated fear of what their connection might cost them. Kiana rested her head on Danielle's shoulder, her fingers entwined with hers, and for a moment they allowed themselves to exist in a fragile bubble of peace. Danielle's behavior did not go unnoticed. LaToya, ever observant, began to piece together the subtle changes in her colleague. Danielle grew increasingly restless, her once composed demeanor now marked by nervous glances and an unusual preoccupation with the logs and schedules. LaToya attempted to broach the subject again, her tone gentle but firm. Danielle, however, brushed her off, evading the conversation and retreating further into her own thoughts. She avoided eye contact and shifted the focus whenever LaToya pressed too closely. Despite her inner turmoil, Danielle could not pull herself away from Kiana. The connection, though fraught with risk, had become a lifeline she could not abandon. Each stolen moment with Kiana felt like an escape from the rigidity of her life, a glimpse of something forbidden yet profoundly fulfilling. She ignored the mounting consequences, choosing instead to cling to the fragile bond they had forged, even as it began to unravel the carefully maintained structure of her professional world. Kiana's demeanor shifted one evening during a quiet moment in the library. Her usual warmth and charm were replaced by a calculated seriousness. She spoke with precision, outlining a plan she had been formulating for months, a plan to escape the confines of the prison. Kiana wanted Danielle to play a crucial role, leveraging her access to falsify visitation logs, disable cameras during key moments, and provide her with keys to a service exit. The request was delivered with an air of expectation, as though Kiana had no doubt that Danielle would comply. Danielle was horrified. The magnitude of what Kiana was asking struck her like a blow. Helping an inmate escape was not just a breach of protocol, it was a crime that would ruin her career, her reputation, and possibly her life. Her immediate refusal was met with a sharp shift in Kiana's tone. The vulnerability and tenderness that had drawn Danielle and were gone, replaced by a steely resolve that sent a chill through her. But just days before this confrontation, their connection had taken another intimate turn. Late one evening, Danielle had found herself lingering outside the library after hours, waiting for Kiana. When Kiana arrived, she seemed more subdued than usual, her confidence softened by an unusual air of melancholy. She motioned for Danielle to follow her into the storage room, a secluded space they both knew well. Inside, under the dim light, Kiana began speaking about her past again, recounting a moment of heartbreak that left her voice trembling. Danielle reached out instinctively, placing a hand on Kiana's shoulder. The touch lingered, and before either of them could stop, the moment escalated. Their kisses became more fervent, their bodies pressing together as if to erase the distance between them. Danielle was aware of every sound, every breath, the way Kiana's fingers grazed her skin, igniting sensations she hadn't felt in years. They moved to the floor, seeking each other in the stillness, their passion a desperate escape from the realities they faced. The room seemed to pulse with heat and energy as they surrendered to their feelings, finding solace in each other's arms. When it was over, Danielle lay beside Kiana, her head resting on her chest. For a moment, everything felt right, as if the world outside the small room didn't exist. Kiana's fingers traced lazy patterns on Danielle's back, her voice a soft murmur of reassurance. Danielle wanted to freeze the moment, to stay in that fragile bubble where nothing else mattered. But deep down, a voice reminded her of the risks, the line she had crossed, and the consequences waiting on the other side. That memory made Kiana's betrayal all the more devastating. A few days later, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, outdated smartphone. The screen lit up, displaying photos of Danielle and Kiana together, moments stolen in the library, in the laundry room, and in other corners of the prison where they thought no one was watching. Danielle's heart sank as Kiana explained that the photos were only part of the evidence she had collected. There were notes, texts, and even recordings that documented their relationship. Kiana didn't need to explain what would happen if these fell into the hands of the warden or the authorities. The implication was clear. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety for Danielle. She barely ate, her appetite lost to the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. Nights offered no solace, as she lay awake replaying Kiana's threats over and over. Her mind raced through every possible scenario, but none of them seemed to offer a way out. Each morning, she dragged herself to work, her nerves frayed and her composure slipping. Her colleagues noticed the changes, but Danielle deflected their concern, afraid that even a hint of her turmoil might unravel everything. Kiana, meanwhile, intensified the pressure. She cornered Danielle during shifts, her words laced with veiled threats and subtle reminders of what she could lose. The warmth that once defined their relationship had vanished, replaced by cold manipulation. Kiana no longer tried to hide her true nature, using Danielle's feelings against her with ruthless efficiency. Each encounter left Danielle feeling more trapped, as though the walls of the prison were closing in on her. Danielle's isolation deepened. She stopped speaking to LaToya and avoided spending time in the staff lounge, unwilling to face the questioning looks of her peers. Her world became a tightrope walk, every step weighed down by the constant fear of exposure. Kiana's demands loomed over her like a storm cloud, darkening every moment of her day. Danielle knew she was being manipulated, but the hold Kiana had on her was unshakable. The trust that had once defined their connection was gone, replaced by a toxic dynamic that left Danielle feeling powerless and utterly alone. Danielle entered the dimly lit laundry room, the rhythmic hum of industrial washers and dryers filling the space. It was late afternoon, a time when the room was usually empty except for the occasional inmate assigned to laundry duty. Kiana was already there, leaning casually against a folding table, her expression calm but her eyes sharp with expectation. Danielle's heart pounded as she approached, her palms damp and her mind racing. She had spent the entire day rehearsing what she would say, hoping to find some way to defuse the situation and regain control of her life. Kiana wasted no time. She reiterated her demands, her voice steady and laced with an air of confidence that left Danielle feeling small. Kiana made it clear that if Danielle refused to cooperate, there were other ways to ensure her plan succeeded. She hinted at a backup strategy, one that didn't require Danielle's help but would still expose their relationship. Each word felt like a dagger, driving deeper into Danielle's sense of desperation. Danielle tried to reason with her, but Kiana remained unmoved. Instead, her tone shifted, becoming mocking and cruel. She belittled Danielle's feelings, dismissing them as a foolish weakness that had made her easy to manipulate. She called Danielle naive, a pawn in a game she didn't even realize she was playing. Kiana's words were like gasoline poured onto the fire of Danielle's growing anger and fear. As Kiana continued, Danielle felt a boiling rage rise within her. The months of manipulation, the sleepless nights, the suffocating anxiety, all of it reached a breaking point. Her eyes fell on a heavy wrench lying on a nearby shelf. Without fully thinking, she reached for it, her hand trembling as she gripped the cold metal. Kiana didn't seem to notice until it was too late. In a flash of blinding fury, Danielle swung the wrench with all her strength, the impact landing squarely against Kiana's temple. Kiana staggered backward, her expression shifting from confidence to shock. She collapsed to the floor, blood pooling beneath her head. Danielle froze, her breath caught in her throat, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins pushed her forward. She struck again, the wrench connecting with a sickening thud. And then again. And again. Each blow was driven by a mix of anger, fear, and the primal instinct to silence the threat once and for all. When Danielle finally stopped, the room was eerily silent except for the steady hum of the machines. She stood over Kiana's lifeless body, her hands trembling and her chest heaving. Reality came crashing down around her. She stared at the bloodied wrench in her hand, then at Kiana's motionless form, and felt a wave of horror at what she had done. Danielle's instincts for survival took over. She knew the only way out was to cover her tracks. Moving quickly, she wiped the wrench clean of fingerprints and returned it to the shelf. She then retrieved the laundry log and made an entry that placed another inmate, Carla Brown, in the room at the time of the incident. Carla, known for her aggressive behavior and recent altercations with Kiana, was the perfect scapegoat. Before leaving, Danielle scanned the room for any remaining evidence. She adjusted her uniform, ensuring there was no blood on her clothing, and wiped down every surface she had touched. Satisfied that she had erased any connection to the crime, she stepped out into the hallway, her heart still racing. The familiar clanging of the prison gates and the distant murmur of voices filled the air, but Danielle barely heard them. She walked with purpose, blending seamlessly back into the daily routine, all the while knowing that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Kiana's body was discovered by a guard during the next routine check of the laundry room. The scene was grim, with blood splattered across the cold concrete floor and the body lying crumpled between two industrial washing machines. The discovery sent shockwaves through the prison, triggering immediate lockdown procedures. Guards ushered inmates back to their cells while administrators scrambled to assess the situation. Within hours, Detective Elijah Pierce, a seasoned investigator with the Birmingham Police Department, arrived on the scene to lead the investigation. Pierce was methodical as he surveyed the crime scene. Something about it felt off. The wrench used as the murder weapon had been neatly returned to its place on the tool shelf, wiped clean of prints but still faintly stained with blood. The meticulousness was unusual for a prison murder, where crimes of passion often left chaos in their wake. Additionally, the absence of surveillance footage from the laundry room complicated the case. The prison's cameras had conveniently malfunctioned, leaving only a patchwork of recordings from adjacent areas. The initial investigation pointed to Carla Brown, a volatile inmate with a history of conflicts, including a recent altercation with Kiana in the cafeteria. The prison logs showed Carla's presence in the laundry room at the time of the murder, further solidifying her as the prime suspect. However, when Pierce interrogated Carla, her vehement denials and insistence that she was in her cell struck him as unusually convincing. Witnesses confirmed her claim, which cast doubt on the log entries. Pierce began interviewing guards and inmates, piecing together the hours leading up to the murder. LaToya Martin, the prison psychologist, came forward with observations about Danielle. LaToya described how Danielle's behavior had changed in recent weeks, becoming more erratic and guarded. She admitted to suspecting that Danielle had formed an inappropriate relationship with Kiana but had lacked evidence to report it formally. Pierce noted LaToya's words, his suspicions sharpening. The breakthrough came when officers conducting a search of Kiana's cell found a bundle of hidden letters beneath her mattress. The letters, written in Kiana's distinct handwriting, detailed her relationship with Danielle. They described their secret meetings, the growing intimacy between them, and Kiana's manipulation of Danielle to assist in her escape plan. Some letters were unfinished, fragments of plans and emotions, but they painted a clear picture of the dynamic between the two women. Among the letters were sketches and small notes from Danielle, further implicating her. When Pierce confronted Danielle with the evidence, she initially denied everything. Her demeanor was defensive but controlled, as though she believed she could talk her way out of the situation. However, as Pierce laid out the letters, the falsified logs, and the inconsistencies in her statements, Danielle's composure began to crack. The pressure mounted as LaToya and the warden joined the interrogation, pressing her to explain her actions. Finally, faced with the weight of the evidence and the futility of denial, Danielle broke down and confessed. Her voice was heavy with emotion as she described the months of manipulation and the toxic spiral that had consumed her life. She recounted the moment in the laundry room, her anger boiling over as Kiana mocked her. Danielle admitted to the murder but insisted it was not premeditated. She claimed she acted in a moment of blind rage, though the detective noted the deliberate steps she took to cover her tracks afterward. The case moved swiftly through the courts. Danielle's confession, combined with the letters and manipulated logs, left little room for defense. Her attorney argued that Kiana's manipulation and emotional abuse had pushed Danielle to a breaking point, but the jury was unmoved. The verdict was guilty on all counts: murder, falsification of records, and misconduct as a corrections officer. Danielle was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security prison, a place where she would now live as an inmate rather than a guard. Her story quickly became infamous among the prison staff, a cautionary tale about the dangers of crossing professional boundaries. LaToya continued her work in the prison, more vigilant than ever in monitoring the mental and emotional health of the guards. She often thought of Danielle, wondering if she could have intervened earlier and prevented the tragedy. Detective Pierce, reflecting on the case after its conclusion, felt a lingering sense of unease. Despite solving the murder and bringing justice, he was struck by how quickly love, desire, and vulnerability had turned into manipulation, betrayal, and violence. As he closed the file on Danielle's case, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the human frailty that had led to such a devastating outcome. The prison, with its gray walls and endless cycles of confinement, seemed to blur the lines between those who were meant to uphold the law and those who had broken it.